Good morning. The Oversight Committee will come to order. We on the Oversight Committee exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. When President Obama took office, he promised the American people to have a more transparent administration, the most transparent administration in history. From that point on, this was a standard that the Obama administration would be held to. Almost 4 years later, more and more it seems that their own actions, the actions of this administration, say just the opposite is true. The U.S. Department of Labor, led by Secretary Hilda Solis, has unilaterally changed the method by which the media accesses the Bureau of Labor Statistics job data. This unprecedented action has serious freedom of the press implications. Let there be no doubt, we appreciate the need for simultaneous release of this sensitive information. But that has been accomplished for more than a generation through a procedure that was much more effective, or as effective, and more acceptable to the media itself. The abrupt nature of this change, coupled with the absence of a clear explanation and a lack of public input, raises key questions about who made this decision to implement this change and why. Did that individual have the authority of law? As the committee has examined this, this isn't the first time the issue has come up concerning the Labor Department's reach into the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You'll recall the DOL received $500 million in stimulus funds to train workers for so-called green skills. But an audit by the Inspector General found the program to be an utter failure and represented a tremendous loss to the taxpayer. This included training for occupations that are hardly green, such as welder, sheet metal worker, and machine operator. Certainly those are jobs that may be needed. The skills are valuable, but they're certainly not all of a sudden green after hundreds of years of being around as a profession. Aside from the excuse waste that perpetrated the Department of Labor, they have been using the guise of green jobs to justify ongoing funding of the President's green agenda. However, the standard they have invented includes counting as a green job, in addition to the welder, college professors are now green. Environmental reporters are now green. Policy experts at any think tank can be green. In fact, lobbyists can be green. Now, I've been in Washington for nearly 12 years. There's a lot of green with lobbyists. None of it should be counted as an environmentally green job. There are 33 times as many so-called green jobs in the septic tank, and you can't make these things up, guys, septic tank and portable toilet servicing industry as there are in solar, energy, and utility areas. More than 160,000 of these green jobs are related to school bus drivers. Using these tactics to manipulate the number to mislead the American people is nothing short of embarrassing and a betrayal of the standards that President Obama established for his administration. Transparency begins with honesty. You cannot send out false propaganda and then say you're transparent. The truth is essential. The barest of the truth is essential, unfiltered, if you are to be transparent. We all appreciate this administration has an opinion, and this chairman has an opinion that is sometimes different. We are entitled to our opinions. We are not entitled to our facts. Is it any wonder that such concerns, why there is such concern now that Secretary Solis's department wants to unilaterally change and control how the press receives job numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics? Of course, when invited to appear today to explain why this change in freedom of the press would occur, Secretary Solis, in no uncertain terms, turned down all invitations and offered us alternatives. We appreciate those who are here as alternatives. However, ultimately, if you're the Secretary of Labor, the buck should stop with you. If it doesn't stop there, where can the Americans believe it stops? It doesn't stop at the White House if the Secretary allows something to happen and then doesn't have an answer. We will hear more about that here today, and I hope it will send a clear message to the Administration. With that, I recognize the distinguished ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for holding today's hearing, which appears to focus on two very different topics involving the Department of Labor and Bureau of Labor Statistics. The first topic is the integrity of the Department of Labor's job reporting. The Department of Labor strikes a balance between preventing the unauthorized release of key economic data and providing journalists with access to that data ahead of time so that they can prepare their stories with context about the broader employment situation. This balance is very important. The media are the public's eyes and ears, so it is critical that they have the access necessary to ensure that they have a thorough and accurate understanding so that they can place it in context. A leak of this data could have negative consequences. For example, in the hands of certain traders, early access to this data, even if just by a few seconds, could allow their powerful computer trading algorithms to manipulate in markets and reap millions of dollars. That is why the Department and other data reporting agencies employ procedures to prevent unauthorized releases. Recently, the Department of Labor hired Sandia National Laboratories, which oversees the security of our nuclear arsenal, to evaluate whether changes were needed to meet the new security requirements of today's constantly changing technological environment. Sandia found significant vulnerabilities in the Department's procedures and recommended steps to mitigate those risks. Sandia also warned that those seeking to break current security controls are profit-driven, technically sophisticated individuals or organizations who may have considerable resources at their disposal. Acting on Sandia's recommendations, the Department announced new controls on hardware and software in the lockup environment. In addition, the Department has now excluded specific firms that sought access to sell data to Wall Street traders a fraction of a second before other traders see it. Initially, some in the media complained that the Department's proposed changes were too restrictive, and these complaints appear to be in the impetus for today's hearing. Over the past month, however, the Department has worked with press outlets to accommodate their concerns while enhancing security. We anticipate that there will be additional announcements regarding these ongoing discussions soon. The second topic of today's hearing appears to be how the Department of Labor calculates the number of green jobs in the United States economy. This is the third hearing the majority has called on this topic, and the third time the Department of Labor officials have testified before us. Last July, the Brookings Institution issued an important report on green jobs with the following findings. First, green jobs employ almost 2.7 million Americans, more than the fossil fuel industry and twice the size of the bioscience sector. Second, they said, the green economy has expanded at greater rates than the economy as a whole. They went on to say The green economy offers considerable and more highly paid opportunities for low and middle skilled workers. And finally, they said, fourth, the green economy is manufacturing and export intensive, both of which are critical for America's future. Since this report was issued, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that the number of green jobs is even higher, reporting that over the 3 million that have helped rebuild our economy. This news should be welcomed by policymakers in Congress. Unfortunately, this committee seems more intent on challenging the methodologies used by the Bureau of Labor Statistics rather than helping put people back to work. I thank the witnesses for being here yet again today, and I look forward to your testimony. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I would take note that although the ranking member mentioned the DOL report, the Sandia report has not been made available to us under any circumstances. So, notwithstanding the gentleman's assertions, until the Department of Labor makes that report available to us, we will consider it to be a CYA document held close against Congress. I hope the gentleman will join with me in issuing a subpoena if they will not deliver that document they allege is the impetus for this closing.
I'd be happy to, glad that the Chairman is willing to consult with us on the subpoena. I'd be happy to talk about it, and if it's warranted, I certainly would join you.
I thank the gentleman. Members will have 7 days in which to submit opening statements for the record. We will now recognize our first panel. Mr. Daniel Moss is the Executive Editor for Economics and International Government at Bloomberg News. Welcome. Mr. Rob Doherty is the General Manager United States for Reuters News. Also welcome. Ms. Lucy Delish, would you pronounce it? Delish, is the Executive Director at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Also welcome. Dr. Keith Hull is the former Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and is currently a Senior Fellow at the Mercatus Center. And last but not least, I will work hard on this one, Ms. Diane Furgott-Roth is the former Chief Economist of the United States Department of Labor and a current Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Welcome all. Pursuant to our committee's rules, would you please rise to take the oath and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all answered in the affirmative to the best of their ability. Please be seated. Now, many of you are returning to testify. A couple of you, it may be your first. We have members that will be coming in and out. We estimated about half an hour for your opening statements, so try to stay as close to 5 minutes as you can. We will have your entire opening statement plus additional material you may wish to submit to support anything you say here today included in the record without objection. So you only need to summarize because for the record, all that you have submitted will be on the record. Mr. Moss.
Chairman Issa, Congressman Cummings, members of the committee. I thank the committee for the opportunity to appear today, and I want to express my particular appreciation to the committee for its engagement in this issue. Bloomberg News provides data, news, and analytics to decision makers in industry beyond finance. Bloomberg News is delivered through the Bloomberg Professional Service, through television, radio, mobile, the Internet, and 2 magazines, Bloomberg Businessweek and Bloomberg Markets. We are syndicated in hundreds of newspapers globally. We cover the world with more than 2,000 reporters and editors in 146 bureaus in more than 70 countries. We are experts at publishing economic statistics and disseminating market-moving information. Media stakeholders are making progress, Mr. Chairman, with the Department of Labor in arriving at a place that will not undermine the First Amendment. will not reduce transparency and accuracy of critical data or create unacceptable cybersecurity risks. While no conclusive agreement has been reached, the movement that we have seen would not have been possible without the engagement of members of this committee and committees and members in both chambers of both parties. We are particularly thankful to Senator Blunt for his engagement. On April 10, without the notice and comment period dictated under the Administrative Procedures Act, the DOL announced a dramatic policy shift. Henceforth, reporters and editors would be required to use only government software, government hardware, government lines, government notebooks, and government pens. The use of modern news-producing software with the greater accuracy and context it provides would be prohibited. All transmission would be via the Internet, not through secure lines. The Department of Labor would own and operate the lines, control Internet access, and control Internet connections, creating a single point of failure because all news organizations would share the same infrastructure. Although the policy change was unprecedented, it was presented as non-negotiable, a fait accompli. News organizations were required to remove their software, hardware, and dedicated lines from the department by June 15. This proposal threatens the First Amendment. The government would literally own the reporter's notebook. Unlike any other federal agency, the Department of Labor is requiring that reporters write news articles on government-owned and operated computers on a regular basis, which would give the government unfettered access to reporters' notes and drafts. No administration anywhere should have access to a reporter's thoughts, drafts, or notes as a condition for covering the news, let alone news of such importance. The proposal also, the order also threatens national security. House, Senate, and the administration have rightly spent a great deal of time attempting to address potential cybersecurity threats. Protecting our financial markets from disruption by cyber attack has been a key part of that discussion. In the world in which we now live, for the Department of Labor to deliberately force the transmission of data away from secure, dedicated lines and instead mandate its transmission via the Internet is inexplicable. The vulnerability of the Internet to even accidental disruption is a large part of the reason why news organizations have invested in their own secure lines. The prospect of a deliberate disruption, potential spoofing, potential market manipulation are real. In August last year, the Department of Labor's website went down following the release of the monthly employment situation report. The unemployment rate was unavailable for 1 hour. If the April 10 order, Mr. Chairman, goes into effect, the result would be potentially catastrophic. This proposal will increase market vulnerability and volatility. In the modern era of computerized trading, people compete in nanoseconds. Studies of the 2010 flash crash illustrate how quickly small incidents can result in major disruptions. When the Department of Labor hosted a conference call on April 16, ostensibly to answer media questions on the new policy, I asked, quote, "What is the problem you think you imagine this will prevent?" The Department of Labor's response was, "I think we're going to move on. Operator, we'll take the next question." The alleged rationale for the new policy has grudgingly slipped out in dribs and drabs, ultimately relying on a report by Sandia National Laboratories, which, as the Chairman noted, has not been publicly released. The DOL has alleged its new policy is necessary because unauthorized people planted unauthorized equipment in the Department's communications closet. But this is an argument for enforcing the existing policy, not imposing draconian new rules. The Sandia report speaks of those who oppose the Department's recommendations as adversaries. That's according to a summary, Mr. Chairman, which has circulated on the Hill. It notes that although they are willing to bend and potentially violate the law, violence is unlikely as an operational method. Does the Department believe the media are adversaries? What rules and laws are we likely to break? On what evidence or experience is such a statement based? Sandia continues, stating the apparent root cause for the issues driving this assessment is the possible presence of algorithmic traders and or their agents in the press lockup facility. Has the lockup been infiltrated by hedge funds? The public, press and Congress would be entitled to that information. Is it that difficult to distinguish between an authentic news organisation and a hedge fund? Most significantly, if the root cause of the issues driving this assessment is the possible presence of algorithmic traders, why not just expel them from the lockup? Why threaten to erode the First Amendment? In summary, Mr. Chairman, this proposal does undermine the First Amendment. It reduces transparency. It potentially reduces the accuracy of the data, increases market volatility, and poses a cybersecurity threat. Given the DOL's refusal to extend the current June 15 date for removing equipment, the calendar will dictate our shortly seeking an injunction unless a comprehensive overall agreement is reached. An understanding has been reached amongst technical officials of the news organisation and some technical staff at Labor. Labor is still to get back to us on a number of issues, including rules for the lockup. Until an overall agreement is reached in the format of the April 10 letter, the order stands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the new policies and procedures the Labor Department is planning for its press lockups. My name is Rob Doherty. I'm General Manager in the United States for Reuters, which is the news division of Thomson Reuters. Reuters is the largest international news agency in the world. We have more than 2,900 full-time journalists in 200 bureaus around the world reporting in 20 languages. Globally, our audience includes more than 1,700 text media and 600 TV clients, over 35 million visitors to Reuters websites each month, and more than 400,000 financial professionals who subscribe to Thomson Reuters desktop products. On April 10th, the Labor Department notified our Washington bureau chiefs and other news organizations about major changes they plan for the operation of its lockups. Dan has covered those changes in detail, so I won't repeat those. But needless to say, we were taken aback by the planned changes. They were dramatic, announced without any advance notice, and with no real explanation of the rationale, and importantly to us, without any prior consultation with the affected news organizations. I want to be clear on 2 points. First, we believe lockups are extremely useful in promoting accurate and authoritative dissemination of sensitive data because they provide journalists time to better understand the information before sending it to the public. Second, we fully acknowledge the responsibility of the Department of Labor to implement lockup rules to guard against premature release of information. It is in everyone's interest that the Department do so. Indeed, we believe the lockup procedures now in place have been effective in preventing early release of the Labor Department data. But despite that apparent success, the Department plan announced in April would require us to use government equipment to do our work as a matter of routine, something we as an independent news organization fundamentally oppose. Additionally, the changes announced by the Department in April would represent a major step backward technologically for news organizations and for the dissemination of critical data through recognized news channels. That would imperil the ability of news organizations to provide such information to the public in a reliable, accurate, and timely way and lead to confusion in the public and in the financial markets that rely on the Department's data. To gauge the importance of that data to the public in general and the markets in particular, one needs to look no further than last Friday's unemployment report. Years of development work have gone into automating our software to ensure it works with our proprietary editorial system and redundant private communications lines to speed the delivery of crucially important information to millions of our readers and subscribers across the globe. Our software allows journalists to efficiently and accurately incorporate new material from Department news releases, as well as to provide historical data that puts that new material in context. This would be lost if lockup participants must use a Department-provided standard configuration computer and a Department-provided Internet service provider. And it would be lost without any assurance that new procedures would materially decrease the probability of premature leaks. And as Dan said, you can make an argument that actually would increase the difficulties with the dissemination of the data. Because of these concerns, we join with 3 other news organizations, Bloomberg, the Associated Press, and Dow Jones in requesting a meeting with the White House to voice our opposition to the April 10 announcement. We were also hoping to better understand the Labor Department's concerns and to see if we could find a way that the Department could meet its responsibility to prevent early release of data without the draconian changes it was planning. We now have held a series of what I would describe as constructive meetings with the Labor Department officials and staff, and those meetings have left us optimistic that we'll be able to agree on procedures and policies that, while not perfect and not the status quo we would prefer, would, in our view, represent a workable compromise and allow news organizations to disseminate information from the lockup quickly, reliably, and accurately. But as Dan made the point, we're not there yet. We still are hoping we can complete an agreement in time for the July 6th deadline set by Labor. If not, we will be asking the Department for a short delay to allow any agreed changes to be implemented in the least disruptive way possible. And I want to underscore that, as we discuss other issues and reach agreement on other issues, the timing is a really important issue for us. It's now June 6th. As Dan said, the equipment starts coming out on June 14th and 15th. The new procedure goes in place July 6th, which, by the way, is the next unemployment report, which will be hugely watched. Talking to our technical staff, they think it's nearly impossible to do this the right way and be ready for July 6th. So if we are able to reach an agreement on the larger issues, the technical issues, and go forward, I hope the Department will be willing to be flexible on the implementation date. Thank you again for your invitation to address the committee and for your continued interest in this issue, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Delish.
Thank you. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am Lucy Dalglish, Executive Director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. For more than 40 years, the Reporters Committee has provided free legal and advocacy services to protect the rights of journalists working where United States law applies. I am happy to testify today on behalf of the Sunshine and Government Initiative, of which the Reporters Committee is a member. SGI is a coalition of media associations promoting greater transparency in government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. We strongly object to the changes the United States Department of Labor announced less than 2 months ago. The Department's approach, as proposed in April, makes the release of market-moving information less reliable, less secure, more prone to errors and inaccuracies, and less equitable as it reaches the public. Last month, the Sunshine and Government Initiative urged the Labor Department to suspend these changes, clarify the concerns with the current process, and work with us to address those concerns. Since then, only your attention to this issue has helped bring about productive discussions between the media entities and the Labor Department. Quite honestly, we are bewildered by Labor Department's announcement on April 10th, without consulting with any of the media involved, about these dramatic changes that will have a devastating impact on journalists' ability to inform the public in a timely and useful manner. It took the interest of this committee to spur what we understand to be productive discussions between the journalists in the lockup and the Department. As you know, Mr. Chairman, since its formation after 9/11, SGI has worked with you and others on Capitol Hill and across the executive branch to work through problems, and we remain committed to working with the Department on this issue. But let me be clear, we do not wish for the Labor Department to maintain procedures that would advantage one media entity over another or make it easier to break embargoes. We are hopeful that the Labor Department can address vulnerabilities in the current lockup procedures with ongoing dialogue. While these conversations continue, let me describe how the announced changes would undermine the integrity of the high-profile economic indicators released to the public. First, the Labor Department's announced approach raises cybersecurity concerns. Releasing this data through an online connection may allow an Internet hacker to target the release and change key numbers as they leave the Department. Or a denial of service attack could delay release to some or all. Second, the Labor Department's new approach would likely be less reliable than the current practice. Currently, at least 2 media organizations have built redundant system hardware. If a circuit fails, a second circuit already installed in the network reroutes data traffic. If a secure line fails, duplicate dedicated cabling in place carries the traffic. Even attempting to duplicate these secure systems on government-owned computers would be costly to taxpayers. Last, the Department's new approach would make errors more likely. Without their own equipment, preloaded spreadsheets, and custom software to digest the data, journalists will have to type this information relying on memory or handwritten notes. This dramatically increases the chance of errors. Markets that measure time in microseconds surely will react to wrong data before any correction can be issued. No one begrudges the Federal Government for moving quickly, if need be, to address immediate security concerns. But the Labor Department should first explain its concerns and consider the perspective of journalists and the public before making such a dramatic and permanent procedural change. The media takes government interference with its work product very seriously. So does the Constitution. In fact, the First Amendment obligates the government to allow journalists to operate independently from government control. Requiring journalists to draft and publish stories using government-owned computers loaded with government-controlled software simply crosses a line the First Amendment clearly drew to separate the press from the government. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we are committed to working with this committee and the Labor Department to find a resolution that serves the public interest. Thank you.
And thank you. Dr. Hall.
Good morning, Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Cummings and members of the committee. My name is Keith Hall, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason. Most recently, I was the Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2008 to 2012. In my testimony today, I would like to talk about the Bureau of Labor Statistics and its role in disseminating economic data. First of all, let me note that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is an independent federal statistical agency. And as such, it is tasked not only with collecting, compiling, and producing economic data, but also with disseminating the data and explaining it to the public. There are a number of principles which any federal statistical agency follows. It's to disseminate data in both a transparent and independent manner with no bias of any type. They're also tasked with creating a level playing field for the release of data, meaning that nobody has an advantage of getting the data early ahead of other people. In addition, they are responsible for the security of the data, and that's everywhere, including inside the lockup room. In fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has the responsibility to decide whether or not to even have a data lockup. And I'm making this distinction because this is the independent federal statistical agency. This is not the Department of Labor that I'm talking about. Traditionally, news media were considered by statistical agencies as the most effective distributor of economic statistics to the public. Wire services were the most practical and fairest distributor to media outlets. And for this reason, press lockups were designed decades ago to provide the most important economic data to wire service reporters. Wire service reporters would get to look at the data ahead of release time under lockup conditions. They would get to ask clarifying questions. They'd get to write their stories on a typewriter. And then when the release time came, reporters would all race to a bank of telephones and call in their stories. And that's essentially how the lockup runs today, despite tremendous changes in technology. Today now, most new economic data is actually disseminated to the public through a statistical agency website or by email. Lockup continues for the most important economic data, but technology now has changed, and I think it's made it difficult to maintain adequate security inside the lockup. In particular, automatic computer trading now has made BLS data, employment release data, like employment release data from BLS, extremely valuable, and fractions of a second makes a big difference in financial markets. Also, lockup participants may now have specialized computer equipment and software that links to automated trading models. When I was commissioner, back in 2009, I read one particular article, and I'm going to quote from it, and this caused me a great deal of concern. Key economic indicators are released to financial markets through a small and exclusive group of accredited news agencies. A trading model can now read the specially formatted data and enter into a trading position immediately before the larger market has had time to read the release on news wires and digest its meanings. This, to me, raised concerns over whether or not we had a level playing field coming out of the lockup. And I have a number of recommendations on this, but let me also mention a second thing quickly as well. Emerging technology constantly changes, and agencies like BLS that are tasked with disseminating data need to be able to take advantage of new technology and new methods of disseminating data. For example, social media is a relatively new method of disseminating economic data, and other statistical agencies at the moment have free access to use social media. I believe BLS should be allowed to freely use social media and any other new method of dissemination without having to compromise its position as an independent, objective provider of data, free from filtering by the Office of the Secretary, free of bias in its presentation, and free from actual or perceived partisan intervention. That's my first recommendation. Second, with respect to press lockups. I have a number of things I mentioned here that are just common sense and long overdue. Having a lockup agreement, having adequate control of the lockup room. A number of those things have not been in place. They need to be put in place right away. One of the things that I have a particular problem with is TV journalists are now actually allowed to break the lockup and leave the room and, in fact, go outside before the data is released to set up for cameras. I think that's a security concern. So I think that ought to end right away. Most importantly, though, I think that the Bureau of Labor Statistics should be given full oversight authority for conducting all its press lockups, developing and maintaining policy and procedures, and have the authority to establish and implement credentialing and confidentiality protocols for participating news organizations and employees. And let me just say, to some degree, this is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of the Office of Management and Budget, at least if you believe the OMB statistical policy, OMB Federal Statistical Policy Directives number 3 and 4, who make it clear, as I mentioned before, that is BLS's responsibility to determine whether or not there's a lockup, and it's their responsibility to actually disseminate the data, and they're the ones who are responsible for the confidentiality. Thank you.
Ms.
Ms.
Roth.
You should just say Diana. Thank you very, very much.
Maybe after the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to testify here today. I was asked to talk about green jobs, and it's a very topical time to be discussing green jobs because we just got the employment news on Friday, which showed that the number of jobs in the economy rose by only 69,000, following an increase of 77,000 in April. The unemployment rate rose to 8.2%. And has been above 8% for well over 3 years. Well, America might not be good at creating jobs, but it excels at relabeling jobs as green jobs. It's much easier to redefine an existing job as a new job, a green job. How many jobs has our government relabeled as green? The Bureau of Labor Statistics decides which jobs are green and which are not, and they identified 3.1 million in 2010. The latest year available in a release in March 2012. Americans may have toiled for decades at the same job, unaware that a federal agency might someday designate their job green. I'd like to argue that we should focus on job creation rather than green jobs, because we have over 12 million unemployed. Our broadest rate of unemployment is 14.8%. If people want to buy green products such as Priuses because the price of gasoline is high, they will do so. Much emphasis on green has driven jobs overseas. Just 2 examples. Incandescent light bulbs. The ban on incandescent light bulbs has resulted in the closure of those factories, and the new CFLs, the new fluorescents, are all made in China. So there are green jobs, but green jobs for China. Many solar panels, wind turbines that are required by law are made overseas in places such as China. Coal is produced here, but we are increasingly not being allowed to use it. China is using our coal and produces less than 1% of its electricity from renewables. So it makes these products with coal and then sends them to us, which reduces our jobs. So BLS decides which jobs are green, and sometimes these jobs qualify for tax preferences or subsidies. For example, our transportation policy is based on green jobs, with 20% of the Highway Trust Fund reserved for mass transit. Tax subsidies are given to electric vehicles, both for companies to produce them and for Americans to buy them. BLS has defined green jobs as, quote, jobs in businesses that produce goods or provide services that benefit the environment or conserve natural resources, unquote, or as in, quote, jobs in which workers' duties involve making their establishment's production processes more environmentally friendly or use fewer natural resources. So in order for a firm to be considered green, they have to meet one of 5 goals, namely energy from renewable sources, energy efficiency, pollution reduction or removal, natural resources conservation, and environmental compliance, education, training, and public awareness. So I was particularly interested when I came in today to see this cup here. Now, this just is a cup, but on it says, we have the power to save energy. So this fits in with number 5, environmental compliance, education, training, and public awareness. So now people who produce these cups, they would be considered to have green jobs. But that hasn't meant a total increase in jobs in the economy. It's just a matter of relabeling. In agriculture, for example, one of the main categories of workers are 36,000 organic farmers and growers, and their workers are credited with accomplishing both natural resource conservation and creating energy from renewable sources. So when a farmer produces corn to eat, that's not counted as a green job. But when he produces corn for ethanol, that is counted as a green job. With farming, it's possible to calculate the percentage of employment that's dedicated to ethanol or organic produce, but in other areas it's not so clear. One example is wood chips used for biomass. How many workers are employed by the timber industry to create wood chips? Wood chips are largely a byproduct of milling, and milling is not considered a green job. Yet according to a Labor Department definition, the 33,000 wood product manufacturing jobs are called green because companies can sell the wood chips for biomass. I have many other examples in my testimony, but I see that my time has run out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. Dr. Hall, I'm going to begin with you because you do see need for reform in the lockup. But what you said earlier is of concern to me. The Office of Management and Budget has a set of guidelines. It makes every effort to make sure that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is independent. Carl Felicio, do you know who he is?
Yes, I do.
Does he work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
He works for the Secretary of Labor.
So he is, in fact, a political appointee, non-confirmed, working for the Secretary of Labor, and he's the person that came up with this policy, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Okay. So they violated OMB guidelines. It is being directed from the Department of Labor. This is, in fact, not the independent agency intention that you worked for so long and hard, and you've been very candid with us in the past. You know, it's your job to count the green jobs you're told to count, and so you accurately account for the numbers. It's somebody else's decision about whether they're green or not under a definition. So, we've enjoyed your honesty, but your honesty here says it's supposed to be one way. It clearly wasn't. Isn't that correct?
Oh, that's correct. I do think the Bureau of Labor Statistics should be responsible for running the lockup.
By the way, would you ever have thought that the Department of Labor would be, or Bureau of Labor Statistics would be to the left of Brookings, able to come up with more green jobs, even than one of the great liberal think tanks? That you need not answer that one. Mr. Moss, You're one of the companies that invested heavily in proprietary lines in order to send out in a timely basis, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, so you did so for two reasons. One was clearly to ensure that your story didn't fail to go out. And I guess the second one is to make sure you got it out at least as fast as anyone else, if not a few seconds faster. Isn't that right?
Mr. Chairman, we're not interested in getting it out faster than anybody else.
But you at least want to tie the fastest.
We have an interest in
Mr. Doherty next to you is shaking his head yes, so I'm assuming he wanted to.
Yeah, we have an interest in transmitting the information as instantaneously as the lockup rules will allow.
Okay. And Mr. Doherty, you also obviously have an interest in absolutely, positively not being beat to the newsstand.
Yeah, I would just repeat what Dan said. Our interest is to get the information out as quickly as we can to all of our clients within the rules of the lockup.
And Ms. Delish, you sort of representing the umbrella here for a moment. Dr. Hall was very kind in saying that, one, most of the statistics actually just go out on a newswire. They're not important enough, so they go out. Everybody gets them at the same time, and they look at them. But the most important are subject to this lockup historically until today. Let me ask you one question. If, in fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics simply started pumping this all out through their Internet, wouldn't, in fact, it be worse for these most critical information, because then the hedge fund with the best computer diagnosing what is very predictably exactly the same raw statistics would then make the decision on market interruptions and trade during those first few seconds. Doesn't the plethora of different news organizations with different opinions, reporting in a different fashion, reaching sometimes different conclusions on raw data, actually negate the advantage of a hedge fund? Because ultimately looking at any one of these services doesn't guarantee him anything, doesn't give him the raw information as much as it gives him somebody's opinion. And isn't a dozen or 100 opinions a better safeguard against a radical market move than a single piece of fact?
Mr. Chairman, I really have to confess I don't know a lot about how hedge funds operate, but I can tell you that by having multiple news organizations in that lockup disseminating that information, I believe there are safeguards for the public. And I also believe that the independence of those news organizations is a benefit to the public, rather than having the government just being the only source of the information as it gets out, whether it be to the public or to the hedge funds. I think there is value in having multiple news organizations digesting and disseminating this information.
Well, and to the two news organizations represented here today, if you're given no tools, if you're given information in a short period of time basically to report what you're given, aren't you in fact an arm of propaganda? The difference between propaganda and independent news, isn't it the value added that your reporters can bring either through their years of experience or, in fact, the information they bring in that helps them take raw data and turn it into opinionated, factual news?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the advantage of the lockup as it's currently run at the Department of Labor and at Commerce, Agriculture, and agencies disseminating statistics around the world is that it allows us to publish information with as much context and supporting data and as many superlatives as we can. What we publish at 8:30 sharp goes beyond one headline and one number. We endeavour to tell the story both behind the number, on top of it, and underneath it.
Yeah, and I would just add that one important part that we didn't talk about in the April 10th order that Labor put out, although we are in talks about changing this, is that there was no Internet access at all, even in the half an hour or so that leads up to the lockup starting. That's important because it allows our journalists to do a variety of things, but one of those is to see what's happening around the world and add that context in, even if it's breaking at the last minute, 7:45, if they're on the Internet. And with everything happening today in the Eurozone, that sort of information is invaluable. It can really provide some context to the stories.
Thank you. I recognize the ranking member for his questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me, Mr. Hall, it's good to see you again. I just want to make sure we're clear, because sometimes I don't want the wrong and inaccurate information to be on the headlines tomorrow. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is a nonpartisan statistical agency. Is that right?
That's right.
Did the Department, to your knowledge, and you just left, when did you leave? When did you leave the Department of Labor Statistics?
In January of this year.
Yes. Did the Department of Labor or any other entity within government that is focused on the development and advancement of policy interfere with BLS's development of the methodology for counting green jobs?
No, they didn't. They were very good about letting us do our work and staying at arm's length.
And as I listened to the testimony, clearly I understand and sympathize with the news organizations. I understand exactly what you're saying. It seems like we have a question here of balance. Anytime anything gets out of balance, you usually run into problems. But it appears to me that our security procedures are not equal to what technology can be used to do with the data. It seems like there's a, I think Mr. Hall described the way, what happened, how this thing first came about 40 years ago. And now technology has changed dramatically since then. Would you agree with that, Mr. Hall? And then I'll go to you, Mr. Morris.
Congressman, the Department of Labor has a master switch that controls communications into and out of the room. No news headline or story can be published until the labor official literally flicks that master switch at 8:30.
Mr. Hall, did you have a comment?
Well, just that's absolutely true. One of my concerns, though, and one of my concerns with the whole lockup room came from an extraordinary number of incidents out of the lockup room over the past few years that involved this sort of struggling with the technology coming out. And I do think that there is a need to sort of, at a minimum, really review the security in that lockup room.
Congressman, I would add, that's why, these discussions we've been having with the Labor Department have focused on that. They have needs, and as I said in my testimony, we understand they have the responsibility and the right to set up lockup rules. And we're trying, I think our view would be that the April 10th announcement plan, whatever you want to call it, didn't strike that balance. And we're hoping to in these negotiations.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that happens too, and I'm going to urge the Secretary to try to move that along so that you all can come up with an agreement. Because sometimes I think it's a matter of people sitting down and working out things. Not everything has to be legislated. As a matter of fact, it moves a lot slower sometimes when you have to depend on the legislature. But according to a joint news statement issued on December 9, 2008 by the then Commissioner of Bureau of Statistics, Keith Hall, and the then Assistant Secretary of Labor for Public Affairs, data from the November 2008 Employment Situation News Report that was scheduled for release Friday, December 5th at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time was inadvertently transmitted from the lockup facility approximately 25 seconds early, end of quote. The news release states that a similar early transmittal occurred on December 3rd, 2008, involving the data on productivity and costs. The news release clarifies that a wire service, quote, a wire service bureau chief informed us that his outlet had inadvertently released data from the lockup facility early to subscribers on both occasions, end of quote, and that the Department of Labor confirmed this claim. Finally, the news release states the early transmissions were accidental and followed a recent technical change in hardware configuration. Now, Dr. Hall, you were Commissioner of the Department of Labor Statistics at that time, the time these leaks occurred. Is that right?
That's correct.
What can you tell us specifically about how that occurred? And particularly, how were the leaks accidental, and what circumstances allowed such accidental leaks to take place?
As I recall, the news agency was allowed access to the room without any BLS technicians, and they replaced a cable from their computer to that box. It turns out that cable inadvertently bypassed the security on the box. And the company didn't mean to do that. They were just trying to increase this, increase their connectivity, I suppose. So since then, we've tried very hard to. Well, we'd still like. This is why it was one of my proposals to not let people into the room and mess with the equipment without a BLS technician there, so that sort of thing doesn't happen.
And was those leaks, were they detected at the time they occurred?
They were not.
Mr. Daugherty, you write in your testimony, Thomson Reuters takes embargoes very seriously, and we have always intended to comply with the Department's lockup procedures, but our company, after a hardware reconfiguration, did inadvertently uncover a defect in the Department's equipment that resulted in 2 unintentional early releases of data from our machines in the labor lockup in late 2008. End of quote. What can you add to what Mr. Hall said about how the leak occurred? Also, your statement indicates, quote, a defect in the Department's equipment resulted in 2 unintentional early releases, end of quote. Was the fault in this matter with the Department or with your firm?
My understanding, and I wasn't part of this at the time, but my understanding is, it may perhaps shared, we did reconfigure our hardware. My understanding is that the way that interfaced with the lockbox and how that was cabled in the Department led to the inadvertent releases. As I say, and Mr. Hall said, the first release wasn't detected by anyone, certainly wasn't detected by us. The second, we realized and immediately made that known to the Department. We worked with them to figure out what the problem was. A fix was implemented, and as I say in my testimony, we're aware of no other issues in the 3.5 years since. And the Department has 8 to 10 lockups a month, so that would be roughly 350 lockups or so since there was that problem.
One last question. As Dr. Hall, as a former commissioner of the BLS, do you believe that the steps the Department of Labor announced to improve the security of economic data during the pre-release embargo period are necessary?
I think most of them are necessary. The one aspect would be replacing the equipment. That's a pretty dramatic step. I do think that was worth considering, and I do think that is a possible solution. I also think it's a possible solution to release the data on the website and then open up the lockup room, so it runs a little bit behind the website, so people get to write their stories and get it out, but there won't be quite such a rush to move trading from inside the lockup room. I'm not sure for sure. I think it's something that should be done. I do think it should be considered and should be discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And just for the record, when these lapses occurred, who was President of the United States?
I believe it was during the Obama administration, but we did have a lapse, to be fair.
No, November 2008, who was President?
Oh, 2008, I'm sorry. It was the 2008 one? Yeah, that was during.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we understand that this is so long ago that President Bush was responsible for the leak, and yet 3.5 years later we've got a fix proposed. I guess that's quick and dramatic action. Dr. Desjardins is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate you holding the hearing on this topic right now. As everyone is well aware, this is an election year, and I don't think that anyone who follows statistics doesn't realize that the #1 issue facing our country are jobs in the economy, and that's what people are looking to in leadership to make their decision this fall. So I think these numbers are extremely important, and I think this hearing is very timely. The one thing the American people do agree on is that Congress is not doing a very good job, and I think their trust factor for Congress is very low. So the one thing that they should get are the facts on these numbers. I often wonder why we focus so much on unemployment numbers rather than employment numbers, and I just wonder if anybody on the panel would have a comment why we don't look at employment numbers, the number of people actually employed. Anybody want to?
Congressman, that is an argument for allowing the news organizations to publish as much context, as much full information at 8:30 sharp as possible. Congressman and Mr. Chairman and Representative Cummings, if I may return to a point that Dr. Hall made. He was talking about unauthorized access to the room.
Mr. Moss, we'll get back to that. I actually do have a line of questioning for all you.
Excuse me.
Okay. So anyways, I just think that there's such a disparity in unemployment numbers, whether it's 8.2, who's unemployed, who's underemployed, and when we're talking about getting to the truth so people can make a decision on who they want to lead this country, we should provide those the facts to them. Mr. Moss, I will ask you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the Department of Labor's transparency in conducting the change to its lockup policy?
Congressman, I'm here as a journalist, not a mathematician. I would just say that it leaves a lot to be desired. The Department has relied on a Sandia report that's not been made available.
Okay. Mr. Dowdery, what would you rate that?
Well, again, I think, going backwards, based on what we've been able to achieve by having discussions, the discussions that we in the media have had with the Labor Department, I think everybody would have been better served if those discussions had taken place prior to April 10th, as opposed to in response to what was put out on April 10th.
Okay. Well, again, with the uncertainty facing our country and the importance for this transparency in these numbers, the Sandia National Labs was asked to review the Department of Labor's data security procedure. Mr. Moss, or actually Mr. Dowdery, is it correct that the Department of Labor is justifying the change to the lockup procedure by citing the findings of this National Lab report, Sandia?
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen a full copy of that report?
I have not.
All right. To your knowledge, has anyone outside the Department seen a full copy of that report?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. In an executive summary, the report implies that organizations or news organizations like yourselves are adversaries to the Department of Labor. Do you believe that you are adversaries to the Department?
I do not, sir.
Nor do I.
Okay. Are you personally aware of any security deficiencies with the Department's lockup procedures?
Congressman, this brings me back to a point I wanted to make in response to Dr. Hall, if I may.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Dr. Hall referred to one of the problems being unauthorized access to the room. That is an argument for the enforcement of an existing policy, not the replacement of that policy with something very draconian. Access to the room is supposed to take place with a technically proficient Department of Labor official, and we're comfortable with that.
Okay. Ms. Dalglish, the Department of Labor's new policy for its lockup facility would require all reporters to use government-owned and government-operated software, hardware, and wiring. Is this action permissible under the First Amendment?
Dr. Desjardins, I don't believe so. And I think it raises substantial First Amendment problems. As you know, the First Amendment is designed to allow the press to operate independently. When you're using government-owned hardware and software and you have no control over what it does, and you have no knowledge of, perhaps in an extreme circumstance, you don't know what they are able to monitor from your work. You don't know what they're taking. You don't know what they're putting into it. You have no control what goes out. I think it's a very frightening prospect.
Do you, to your knowledge, do any other government agencies require reporters to use equipment and tools owned by the government?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. It's possible, but I'm not aware of one.
Okay. So, in your opinion, this government ownership could be problematic for the freedom of the press?
For freedom of the press and for the public's right to get independently gathered and digested and disseminated information.
All right, thank you. Dr. Hall, as you probably know, the current head of the Office of Public Affairs, Mr. Felicio, has not been confirmed by the Senate as he is technically a senior advisor. Do you recall if during the Bush administration that position was occupied by someone who was Senate confirmed?
Yes, I believe it was.
Okay. Then, Dr. Hall, given the importance of these numbers, as I've talked about earlier, both economically and politically, do you think it's right that the process for the release is being overseen by a non-confirmed political appointee?
No, I don't. And I think the most important thing is that BLS has the responsibility for the security of the lockup room and for disseminating data with a level playing field, yet they don't have the authority to make changes because they don't run the lockup room.
All right. Thank you. And I thank you all for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. With that, we go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for being here today. I especially want to welcome Dr. Hall from the great university, George Mason University in Northern Virginia, in my district. So we're delighted to have you here. And maybe, Dr. Hall, I could begin with you. I'm looking at the Sandia. I'm listening to your testimony, and if I could infer from what you were saying, when you talked about how originally this process was established, the lockup, and the control of data, and reporters waiting at their trusty typewriter to get it out, I think you were leading us to believe that technology maybe has passed us by, and I'm looking at, just as legitimately, I think Ms. Dalglish has warned us about, gee, even with the best of intentions, government insisting on transfer to all of their technology and their government-controlled computers compromises the First Amendment rights of the Fourth Estate. Government also has a legitimate concern. After all, the media are profit-making entities that have motives that go beyond just the First Amendment sometimes. And I'm reading from the executive summary of the Sandia report, and it says, although DOL operations, BLS, and OPA personnel are doing due diligence in their efforts to monitor the press lockup facility, their efforts are complicated by the presence of non-DOL IT equipment and communications lines in this facility. The opaque nature of this equipment and DOL operations, BLS, and OPA stakeholders is a major impediment to ensuring that embargoed data are not released prior to authorization. In your opinion, Dr. Hall, from your experience, is that a legitimate concern?
Yes, it is.
So we have to balance that with the legitimate First Amendment concerns we've heard here from the three witnesses on your right.
Absolutely.
And might that be the motivation of the Department of Labor in these new regulations? I mean, I will withhold judgment as to whether they went too far or whether better notification could have been given and whether the press should have been brought in earlier to dialogue about that. But that might have been their motivation, not the hobnail boot of government on the necks of the media trying to strangle the First Amendment.
Sure. In fact, I absolutely support generally the recommendations. The only thing about the IT equipment, I think, is worth considering having government equipment in there, but I think it probably should be studied a bit more. I happen to think that there's a bigger policy issue here for the federal statistical agencies. They need to decide whether or not it's allowable, it's advisable to have trading come out of lockups. And I think that question needs to be.
Do we even need a lockup? I mean, given technology, why have a lockup at all? There's no First Amendment right, I might add, to being in a lockup.
No, that's right.
But why have one at all? Why not just post something on the web at 8:30 and everybody can have at it?
No, absolutely. I think the issue, at least for BLS, is we want to disseminate the data. We want to give people a chance to write accurate stories and be able to ask questions and get those stories right. That was originally the idea of the lockup. But you're absolutely right. In fact, like I said, most economic data is in fact just put up on the.
I think the inference to be drawn from your testimony is that's where you were leading us, from that typewriter to today's fast-moving 24/7 news world with the technology advancing. Might the government have another concern, and that is that leaks or unfair advantage to somebody in terms of information is enormous power? I'm looking at a letter, for example, that was submitted by the Republican ranking member of our counterpart committee in the Senate, Senator Collins of Maine, writing to Secretary Solis, expressing concern about the unusual trading activity reported in the Wall Street Journal just prior to the release of the unemployment data in the month of May. Is that also a legitimate concern of government, that, gee, we don't want to somehow give an unfair advantage to somebody that might move markets fairly or unfairly and do damage in a broader economic sphere and favor one entity over another? Does the government have a legitimate concern about that?
Oh, absolutely, and that's one of the principles for a statistical agency, is to help do its best to create a level playing field and not have that happen.
Final question. We heard the testimony of your seatmate there on the left, Ms. Furchtgott-Roth. When you were at BLS, did you see untoward and capricious interference by the Department of Labor forcing you to redefine existing jobs arbitrarily as green?
No, not at all.
Not at all? I thank you. My time is up.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would yield my time to the Chairman, who is so well versed in all the issues related to this hearing.
You're too kind. You're going to go a long way on this committee. Ms. Fergat-Roth, I don't think I heard you say that this was about interference. I think that your statement, and we have a second panel, had to do with the fact that a substantial number of what Dr. Hall put out, this 3.1 million green jobs, are in fact jobs that have been around for generations. Isn't that true? I mean, septic tank, cleaners, in fact, are not a new profession. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, the federal definition of green jobs was under Title 10 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, which was signed into law by President George Bush, which gave BLS the instruction to do this. But nevertheless, it does result in relabeling of jobs. So someone who's putting in a low-flow toilet, for example, that's a green job. A regular toilet is not a green job. What we need to be focusing on is just creating jobs. This is not something we should be worrying about.
Dr. Hall, I think the reason that there's controversy about the green jobs is, in fact, a lot of them came out of, quote, stimulus money, and the claim that stimulus was working included the claim of those green jobs. Wouldn't you agree that, as an observer, that that was a lot of where your information got used?
It seems that way, yes.
Okay, so one of my questions, and probably the most important question, is if I relabeled all of these jobs, since most of them, such as diesel repair person repairing a mass transit bus, since that was a green job 50 years ago, wouldn't it be fair, if we wanted to get accuracy, that we would go back all those generations and we would simply have this rise and fall of as close as we could the same job year over year? So wouldn't we have found, as a result, that at the beginning of this recession, we lost green jobs?
Absolutely, it's quite possible. A new data series doesn't really tell you about the past, so you really don't get an idea of what's changed over time.
So the, if you will, the propaganda value or the disingenuous part of green jobs is we're not talking about the fact that green jobs undoubtedly, since it includes welders and, like I say, people that empty septic tanks and people who mill wood, since there were jobs lost in those areas, we lost those jobs and then we got them back. So when you score 3.1 million new jobs, some of those are jobs that undoubtedly were lost and then reclaimed.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Ross, I'm going to return to a line because this is the Committee of Transparency, and it's the reason that we will continue having not only these hearings, but we'll continue to push to not have the kind of behavior, and I can't remember what the gentleman from Virginia used in relation to Boot, but his allegation. But the press historically gets treated one way. When the press gets changed to another way and you feel it impinges on your freedoms, isn't that, in fact, at the core of where the press must push back and force government to justify two things? One, the need to do it, and two, pursuant to the First Amendment, the right to do it. In this case, haven't they failed both tests? They failed to give you the specific need of why they needed to do it, and they certainly have not shown where the specifics of forcing you to use government equipment, government lines, bring in no key fobs, et cetera, and of course then have the access to your typed material on their computers so they can look at your material later if they choose to. Hasn't that in fact crossed that First Amendment question as well as the not stating the need?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the DOL in its discussions with the media has highlighted the need for security. We understand that. It's our belief, based on some of the proposals we've discussed with the DOL, that the stated concerns about security can be addressed and the media's First Amendment rights protected. We've had some productive discussions. There are some areas where we're close. We're not there yet.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, may I just
make
2 quick points in response to Congressman Connolly's remarks? Firstly, regarding Dr. Hall's response to your question, sir, he said that some efforts had been complicated by non-Department of Labor lines. Again, that is an argument for enforcing the existing policy. The other point I would make, sir, and Mr. Chairman, is that under the proposals that we are currently negotiating with the Department of Labor technical staff will be able to install equipment that is owned by the news organizations.
If I can ask unanimous consent for just one more question, because Mr. Doherty, thank you. Mr. Doherty, you've been involved and are more knowledgeable of the negotiations. At a minimum, wouldn't the government be able to specify, quote unquote, and approve equipment coming into the lock area rather than, say, as Sandia apparently says in this confidential finding, that they can't know? In fact, isn't it something where part of the negotiation could be that they will approve and specify in advance any equipment coming in? Doesn't the government effectively have that ability to negotiate what comes into their room, thus never being surprised that they didn't know what you were using?
Yes, and that is part of our discussion.
Thank you. With that, we go to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony here this morning. I want to follow up on something that Mr. Connolly was following on that. There was an op-ed recently by a financial advisor, former journalist named Larry Elkin. Some of you may have seen it. He said that outfits such as Bloomberg, Dow Jones, and Reuters compete fiercely for subscribers who pay a lot of money for split-second access to market-moving information. So, Mr. Doherty and Mr. Moss, who receives the first access to reports on employment data from your outlets? Is it the general public, or is it subscribers to the service that you offer?
Subscribers to the Bloomberg professional service are included in the public, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty?
Same with us, sir. And it should be noticed that when everything goes out at 8:30 at the same time, so whether it's a story or a table or data, it all leaves the lockup at 8:30 or whenever the Department of Labor pushes that switch.
Are there any incentives, do you think, for some people at least to try to get that data out a split second earlier than their competitors? Seems there's a lot of money moving around. If somebody could do that, there'd be a certain advantage to that.
Congressman, right now the Department of Labor has a master switch.
No, I understand that. But what I'm asking is the more general question is that, is there a real concern that if somebody were to get that information out quicker than others, they would have an unfair advantage?
Would my colleague yield?
Yes.
I just point out that Mr. Doherty testified a little earlier, quote, we want to get that information out as fast as possible to our clients, unquote.
Of course. That's the only point I try to make. I mean, there is an advantage of getting it out quickly. If you get it out quicker than your competitor, that's a good thing for you.
Absolutely. But as I said earlier as well in that earlier response, everything that we do needs to be done within the rules.
Right.
And so, and as
I
said a couple of times, DOL has control.
Look, I think one of the important points that Mr. Connolly made was that the Department of Labor isn't under any obligation to provide pre-release access at all, correct? I mean, there's no legal or constitutional requirement that the Department of Labor issue that information prematurely or earlier than one fell swoop.
That's correct. But as we said earlier, we think lockups are important.
I think they do that, and I think the Office of Management Budget made it clear they do it because they think there's a value in fostering improved public understanding of the data, and that there's a value to having accuracy for any initial commentary. And that's, I think, you folks agree with, right?
Congressman, if I may?
Briefly, please.
Our attorneys have looked into this question because it's something that the DOL has brought up in our discussions. Right. It's our belief that once an agency establishes a policy that affects a substantive right, in this instance the First Amendment, an agency cannot arbitrarily change that without due process of a proper notice and comment period.
That's not the question. The question was whether they were under any initial obligation to share it at all. They could go through the due process and come back to the point that they're just going to issue it once and everybody's going to get it and that's it, without any pre-release information. I don't think there's any disagreement with your lawyers or any other lawyer on that. But I agree with you. What you're working for is a process that strikes the balance that Mr. Cummings was talking about, one that allows for securing it so nobody gets an unfair advantage, and one that makes sure that you get that ability to have a better public understanding and more accuracy in your initial commentary. You've been working towards that with the Department, have you not?
We have, sir. The discussions have been productive.
Exactly. I guess that's my next point is that I think you've indicated that you've held a series of constructive meetings, Mr. Doherty, and you were left optimistic that you're going to be able to agree on procedures and policies. Is that right?
We are hopeful that we'll finish it, yes, sir.
And Mr. Marsh, you said that even as you prepare the testimony today, the media and the public interest groups appear to be making progress. Do you agree with that?
We're not there yet, but we have made progress.
Okay, so the current status is that you're almost there. Have you got an agreement in principle?
I'm not sure I'd say we're almost, well, I think we're getting close on some issues, sir.
Okay. And have you agreed to ensure security and still try to allow you to choose your own hardware and software?
Those are amongst the proposals we've made.
Okay. And if that proposal also would be the Department would still control the physical access to the hardware?
They would install it and manage it.
Okay. And if that agreement were to go into effect, would that allow you to continue to prepare your news reports and statistical data appropriately? Would that be a direction in which you want to move?
There is no, sir, at the moment there is no formal comprehensive agreement to replace the April 10.
On, right?
If we were to work toward and arrive at something.
Right. Well, how close are you? How close are you?
On the technical issues, I'm told we're close. There are some issues the DOL has said they'll get back to the news services on. We are awaiting DOL comments on rules of the lockup.
And are you feeling that all parties are working in good faith?
I do believe everyone's working in good faith.
Good. Okay, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I guess I'll go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Kelly, could you yield to me for just 1 second?
Certainly. Go ahead, Chairman.
Mr. Moss, Mr. Doherty, were those discussions fruitful during the period prior to this committee taking a direct interest in it? Were you having the same level of discord where you were resolving that an arbitrary rule perhaps wasn't going to be the final judgment?
Congressman, it's my understanding that the interest of the committee has been vital in that process.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the things that I've been looking at, I try to look at the statistics, and I know that what I did previously, it was in the automobile business, and we always looked at markets, and we looked at markets that were available to us, and then we kind of looked at the definitions, and then we looked at the statistics, but they only mattered if they were actually accurate and they actually had some type of credibility. And my questions come on the green jobs energy or initiative, and I'm trying to understand. And Dr. Hall, does BLS not count blue-collar jobs or white-collar jobs, but the BLS was asked to begin counting green jobs. Now, do you believe the BLS was asked to begin counting green jobs for political reasons?
I think it was for policy reasons. I think there was a good deal of interest in green occupations, and I think there was clearly going to be some policy, at least policy debates on the issue.
And I understand that. So in order to give credibility to the policy, then we had to come up with metrics that made sense. So when you talk about green jobs that were created, do you think we've actually done a great job with that? Has it been a positive ROI?
Well, I think part of the issue is that BLS was not trying to feed into a particular policy. It didn't have policies in mind. And they took two approaches, looking at green industries and then green occupations. I think part of the problem is those two things get mixed. But what they were trying to do is they were trying to be helpful. We were trying to be helpful. We were trying to make a definition, a fairly broad definition, so that people could use this data. People could even make up their own definitions of green jobs. There were 1 million definitions around, and use the data to piece together their own definitions and use that for policy.
But I understand that. But whenever you change the definition of what a person's doing,
right,
and you game it or shade it so that the answer that you're looking for can be supported by data that you very, very carefully craft to come up with the answer that you want. And that's the problem that I have with this. I'm trying to understand if we're really looking to develop policies or develop the future of the country and say, boy, there's a great jobs market out there. And a guy that drove a bus before, if he went from driving a regular fuel bus to a propane bus, we created a green job. We didn't create a job. We just shifted a person from one category to another. And I think for people like me, I think you want to see some type of positive return on your investment. And I get the feeling that a lot of that we're looking at was a policy that, while it was well-intended, hasn't really created the jobs that the administration thought it would create. And I have no problem with that. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. The only thing is I just didn't keep on that path if I thought it was wrong. And the reason I couldn't do it is because I was using my own money. But this has been very bothersome to me. So tell me, how do you get from one position to another position and say, well, this supports what it is that we're doing? And that's I think, the problem that the American people have with this, because if we're truly talking about creating jobs, if we're talking about making an environment that's more conducive to creating jobs, this doesn't do it.
Right. Well, I think the first thing I'd like to say is one of the things I learned quickly when I was at the Bureau of Labor Statistics is you can produce the best data you want, the best data you can, and explain it, but you can't control how people use the data. They're going to use it however they want to use it. And that's just true with all BLS data. And in fact, my big goal was that we at least make sure that when people use the data, they know when they're using it wrong, even if they won't go ahead and use it wrong to begin with. So that's sort of an impossible thing for BLS to sort of control.
I can't do it. Ms. Roth, how do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I'm an economist, so I don't feel. But looking at the numbers.
Well, let me put it this way: as an American taxpayer, because that's what we all are, regardless of whether you're sitting up here or you're sitting down there, we're responsible to the people that pay all these bills. It's the hardworking American taxpayers. So I got to tell you how I feel, and I feel at times that we are so separated from reality in this town. I need to know, okay, you use whatever term you want to use, but what is the result of this? Do we have any positive answers?
No. I think the whole concept doesn't make sense. For example, in the transportation area, buses and trains are green jobs, but taxis are not green jobs. But sometimes it makes more sense to be able to take a taxi rather than build an expensive rail line. Okay. So there isn't any point in adding any of these together. Yeah. Or science museums, for example, vis-a-vis another kind of museum. A science museum is a green job. Another kind of museum isn't a green job. The American people want just jobs. I don't think they mind if they're green. With unemployment over 12 million, with the unemployment rate above 8% for over 3 years in a row, we just need lots of regular jobs. Yeah, and we shouldn't worry about whether they're green, blue, red, whatever.
Yeah, well, we're looking for red, white, and blue jobs. It doesn't have to be any other color than that. So, and I appreciate your answers, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. And with that, we go to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Dr. Hall. Doctor, can you describe the work that went into developing the BLS's methodology for counting green jobs, and what were the expert sources the BLS consulted when developing this methodology for counting green jobs?
Sure. First, let me say that the folks at BLS are experts in conducting surveys and collecting data. They're not experts in what's green and what's not green. BLS spent a good deal of time talking with federal agencies who are involved with green things, I guess. Spent some time looking at how some of the states are defining green jobs and how they were finding it useful. And with the private sector. So the idea was to sort of try to vet ideas on what should or shouldn't be included in green jobs, and come up with a definition that was that had some logic to it. But I will say, though, one thing that's pretty clear is there's no one definition, right? There's clearly an arbitrariness to it at some point. And I thought it was important, and I think we did. We erred a little bit on the side of broader, because our goal was to be useful to people. We weren't thinking of ourselves as being the definitive folks who determine what's green and what's not green.
And let's be clear that the Department of Labor Statistics is a nonpartisan statistical agency. Did the Department of Labor or any other entity within government that is focused on the development and advancement of policy interfere with the BLS's development of the methodology of counting green jobs?
No, they did not. In fact, we went to some of the agencies to talk with them about what what they thought maybe should be in a green job or considered a green job or not. But it was entirely up to BLS as to what to include and not include.
Ms. Roth, you evidently do not agree with the Federal policy to promote renewable energy technology or invest in green jobs. But as you know, today's hearing is not about that policy. The hearing title plainly says that the hearing is about DOL's reporting of jobs figures, which includes the definition and the number of green jobs calculated by the Bureau of Labor Stats. On that topic,
would the gentleman yield?
What you know, I'm not going to yield you. Let me finish my question.
I just don't think you intended to disparage the lady's intent. That was the only reason I thought you couldn't have meant that.
Mr. Chairman, can I get some more time? Thank you. On that topic, this is what you say in your testimony. Federal and state governments relabel existing jobs in an attempt to convince themselves and the public that such jobs exist. This entire exercise is an attempt to justify government initiative. You've heard Dr. Hall testify that the BLS, which he led as a President Bush appointee until recently, is an independent statistical agency, not influenced by politics and disinterested in policy formation and analysis. Yet you accuse BLS of engaging in an attempt to justify government initiative. Ms. Roth, did you mean to accuse Dr. Hall and the BLS of engaging in the biased activity of promoting certain policies?
Well, I would say that Dr. Hall is my very good friend, and I would not want to accuse him of anything other than trying to do the utmost good with the data. But I think before you came in, I showed this cup here, which says the power to save energy. And this fits in with a definition of green jobs, environmental compliance, education, training, and public awareness. It is ludicrous to say that there are more jobs created because we're drinking out of these cups than if we were drinking out of plain white cups. We should be concerned with increasing employment in the United States. We, taxpayers, spend a great deal of money. They pay a great deal of money, and they should get the best value. And the best value should be job creation as a whole, rather than dividing the jobs into green jobs and other jobs.
Now, do you have any anecdotal evidence of where it's just been a huge boondoggle? I know in Missouri we have a certain wind farm that was created by one of the president's bundlers. And I mean, could you point to something like that and say, there's been no jobs created? Do you have any anecdotal evidence to that?
Well, I mean, there is Solyndra, a company that received...
I'd ask the gentleman to have an additional 15 seconds without objection.
Thank you.
There's Solyndra that received $535 million and then went bankrupt. You had a hearing last month on Bright Source Energy that showed involvement in the highest levels at the White House and the approval of that loan guarantee. These are all green jobs. Meanwhile, coal is not green but employs many, many Americans. We have 200 years of inexpensive natural gas that we could be mining and giving Americans lower household utility bills. Wind and solar might be green jobs, but they result in high electricity bills for households.
What about Keystone Pipeline? Would you count that as green jobs?
I would say this is something that should be approved so that we can bring more oil down
is that
from
green
Canada.
Job? Would that be characterized as a green job?
Under BLS, would you think a pipeline would be a green
job?
No,
I'm asking you. Now, wait a minute.
I don't know. I believe that construction of the Keystone Pipeline would not be a green job, even though it would create more jobs for our refineries in the Gulf of Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now go to the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Genta. Could you yield to me for just 10 seconds?
I would be happy to.
Thank you. I might make note that Hilda Solis, now the Secretary, was a sponsor of the Count Green Jobs bill, which got put into the Act. So the very idea that this is not political, when in fact our former colleague is responsible for it and now oversees making sure that the numbers come out, I think we have to be honest. It is all about politics. It has always been all about politics. And to answer your question on pipeline, quite frankly, the President was standing in front of green, empty pipelines when he went to Oklahoma. So they probably would count as green just because of the color of the pipeline. With that, we go to the gentleman from New Hampshire's time.
Would the gentleman from New Hampshire yield to me for 15 seconds?
No, thank you. I do need to get to my question, so I appreciate the Chairman yielding me back the time. I'm glad we're actually having this discussion, and I wanted to address my comments and questions to Ms. Furchtgott-Roth. I personally believe that there is some politicism in this particular issue. Other people may disagree, and they're fair to have their point of view and their perspective, and I respect that. But you said something in your earlier testimony that I think is very important. Why distinguish a job from a green job from a job? A job is a job is a job. And we are in an economic climate where we just saw our job growth for the last month at 69,000. The unemployment rate has now jumped 0.1%, and we have CBO estimates that they could meet or exceed 8.5% by the end of the year. So people at home, at least in New Hampshire, aren't distinguishing between a green job or a job. What they're looking for is a career. So to that end, the Department of Labor receives a $500 million grant in stimulus funds to train workers in green skills. I probably would not have done that had I been in the position to make that decision. But that being said, the $500 million was appropriated. I think we have 189, somewhere around there, different programs that we are now training for careers in this in this related field. I guess my question to you would be, has there been an economic benefit to these green job training? Have we seen a demonstrable, or have we seen a specific economic benefit to our economy?
I would say that there has been practically no benefit to the green jobs training. The Assistant Inspector General of the Department of Labor testified in June 2011 that there were only, at that time, there were only 1,366 green jobs trainees that had been in their jobs for 6 months afterwards, which was a very low return. The cost was over $100,000 per job trained. If you want to look at where there is low unemployment, you look at North Dakota with an unemployment rate of 3%, the lowest in the country. There's a boom because of fossil fuels, hydrofracking, natural gas development, and there are no, I believe there are very few, I don't know of any green job trainees in North Dakota, but there's so much business you can't even get a motel or a hotel room there. The same with Eagle Ford, south of San Antonio in Texas.
And then of the people who were trained, do you have a percentage or a number as to how many of those were people currently employed or incumbent employees?
I do not have that percentage offhand, but I could get back.
Would it surprise you if it was about half?
That would not surprise me.
Okay. And then finally, do you have, or if you don't have it here, is it something, how could we find, I'm curious to know, of the people who were trained, how many of them actually are now working for an employer that got a DOE loan?
I don't have that information with me, but I could look for it and see if it's available and get back to you.
That would be wonderful, and I would yield back the balance of my time to the Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, please.
Back to that point, though, we're not debating green jobs. We're debating whether, in fact, what they're calling green jobs are green jobs here. If you drive a bus, you've got a green job. If you sell used sporting goods, you have a green job. If you do, well, we already went through this, septic tank emptying, it's a green job. If you work at the Salvation Army recycling clothes, it's a green job. No problem with any of these, but when people say there's been 3.1 million green jobs produced, aren't they in fact talking about jobs that have been around since before anyone in this room was born? And in fact, those jobs rise and fall and have very little to do with with anything unless you look at them in context over a long period of time with a same job analysis as an economist.
That is correct, yes. The science museums were in place beforehand. Now they are labeled green jobs, so they are part of this green job creation, even though they were there beforehand. The same with the cup manufacturers. They just didn't put this logo on the cup.
Thank you. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pretty perplexed by this entire discussion, and maybe you on this panel can shed some light. What happens with this lockup is that you get information at 8 o'clock, you have a half an hour to digest it, and at 8:30 you release it to your clients and to the public. That's how I understand it. And all of the time, effort, money, extra efforts, extra expenses that goes into creating this lockup could be erased if we just had the Department of Labor issue these statistics at 8:30, you then digest it, and rather than get the information at 8:30, the traders on Wall Street get it at 9 o'clock, and what have we gained or lost as a result of that? I would suggest that this is all about what works for Wall Street. And I'd like to ask a question of the two representatives from Bloomberg and Reuters, Mr. Moss and Mr. Doherty. Why would anyone subscribe to your newsletters if they weren't getting some benefit in terms of accessing information before the public? In response to one question asked earlier, you said that your information is provided to your clients and to the public at the same time. So could you answer for me, why would anyone subscribe to your newsletters if they're not getting some kind of advantage?
Well, you know, how we send it out is one thing. And as I said, everything goes out at 8:30. How people receive it and use it is totally up to them. So, you know, as to how they would use it, that's where the benefit would come in. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the information does go out to a variety of places. It would go out to people on Wall Street, and not just Wall Street, but you know, the financial community worldwide. It would also go out to media clients who can use it on their websites. It also goes out to the consumers via Reuters.com. But you know, I think the idea is how people use that information once they have it is what the difference is. I would say to your comment that if BLS or the Department of Labor put things out at 8:30, it wouldn't be the things that be to the general public. People will be grabbing that information and putting it out as quickly as they could, and without the benefit of having half an hour to digest it and make some judgments as to the importance of the data.
This is not just about Wall Street. Our subscribers are throughout the country and throughout the world. They include people managing the pension funds of teachers and firefighters. They include universities and other places of higher education. They include philanthropic ventures. They include coffee makers. They include airlines.
It's all about making money, though, isn't it?
Our concern here is about ensuring that the public continues to receive something that they've been receiving for more than a decade, and that the public is fully informed and able to make its decisions accordingly. Remains fully informed.
And I would say,
I still would like an answer to the question, why should I subscribe to your service if you're presenting it to the public and to your clients at the same time?
If you have an interest in economic statistics and the full context, not just what the unemployment rate is or what the payroll creation or destruction may be on any particular month, then you want a news service that provides you with as much context, analysis, and data as possible. The lockup facilitates the transmission of just that at 8:30 sharp.
And I would say, you know, in terms of your point, people subscribe to us for a variety of reasons. People can get our coverage of Congress or the White House on the Internet as well, but other people do pay for that coverage.
I will yield the rest of my time to Mr. Tierney if he wanted to ask that additional question.
Thank you very much. I knew the chairman really wanted to do that because he had about 8 minutes extra, and I knew he wanted to give at least a half a minute to another member of the panel, so I thank you for doing that. I make a point here, just that the Green Jobs Act, which Ms. Solis co-sponsored with me, put it in there, was not about creating jobs. It was about training people with the skills and education needed to take the jobs that were created. So I just didn't want to conflate the two, and I want to make that distinction on that. Also, that there have been about 100 new renewable energy and energy efficiency manufacturing plants that opened up in this country since 2009, a number of them in my district, that were telling us they needed people able to do those jobs and asking for that job training program. So I make that distinction on that. And I guess the only ones not interested in making sure that the green energy and energy efficiencies industries thrive are the Republican Party, because I note the emphasis the Department of Defense is putting on green energy right now for a number of reasons, safety of our troops being one.
The gentleman will suspend.
I thought you might want to finish that.
Pursuant to the rule, as you know, you may do a great many things. You may not disparage the intent of members of either party or any individuals here.
Did you feel disparaged, Mr. Chairman?
To make a comment about the intent
Well, I ask you to clarify. Did you feel disparaged?
Yes, I did.
And how did you feel disparaged?
For the same reason that the gentlelady just down the dais went to the floor for a long period of time. If the gentleman would please refrain from violating the rules of the House.
Well, help me out here. Tell me how you felt disparaged.
The gentleman may continue for his 15 seconds.
I've had my 15 seconds, but I'd use the rest of it to yield to you to tell me how you felt disparaged.
To allege that we don't care about energy, when in fact what we're seeing is people emptying sewage out of porta potties being counted as green jobs, is in fact revealed at the time.
My general statement was taken as a personal issue by you. Is that correct?
You
general statement about seeming that the Republican Party.
You disparaged the Republican Party. The gentleman's time has expired. We now go to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, for 5 minutes.
Well, I can't follow up those fireworks. Well, I won't, Mr. Chairman. I do respect. I try to respect my colleagues, even if they're wrong. But the question in North Carolina, Dr. Hall, you might be the right person for me to ask based on your experience with BLS. I'm deeply concerned about our statistical agencies. We should be a light for the rest of the world on how governments keep track of data, whether it's labor statistics, whether it's our census, whether it's these very key, important pieces of data that we need to have very clear understandings of strikes and balls, the whole thing, right? So I'm very concerned about both the strength of that data and the independence of it, and then making sure that release is done well and correctly, the public has this information. My colleague asked about why you'd subscribe to whether Bloomberg or Reuters or whatever these different services are, and I subscribe to a whole variety of services in my office so I can have data assembled in a way that I can consume it better than maybe what's on the website, maybe putting 50 pieces of data together that are all publicly available and giving you good analysis. I think it's the free market works in that regard, that we can actually have the access to that. In North Carolina, Dr. Hall, we had this issue. The governor for state-level data, Governor Beverly Perdue in North Carolina, who's a governor who's had a variety of issues, but in this circumstance, she released the state unemployment data in a private group. She was speaking to a Rotary Club and released this data before her office put it out officially to the wider variety. How's that done at the state level? Is there a great latitude that governors have on putting out the state level data, and what is that relationship?
Sure. BLS works with state partners to collect the employment data, and one of the things that happens is because we're working with the state labor agencies, and they're helping us, they themselves get the data ahead of time. It's before BLS has done some things. They get the data before the release, and because they're not federal employees, we can't really control what they do with the data. We can ask them, for example, when they write the data up and present it, we can ask them try not to be political. Sometimes they are in how they describe the data, something I wouldn't be comfortable with. And sometimes, as is in this case, it appears like the State office may have shared the data with the governor who then shared it. I happen to think that's a little bit of a problem. And it's something that's sort of falling between the cracks because of this marriage between the Federal and the State governments.
Well, and you know, there are penalties. I mean, there's the Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act of 2002, and it carries a fine of $250,000 up to 5 years in prison or both for breaking that. It's been hashed out in the newspapers, and my understanding is that the governor didn't violate that law. Has there been any action in terms of fines or penalties for release of this type of data?
Not that I know of, and I'm not an expert in the law, but that law that you mentioned, I believe it governs Federal employees.
Okay.
And the Federal handling the data.
So that goes to the State latitude.
Yes.
So to that regard, you know, you served in a previous administration, but do you think that this administration has been too lax in its release of the monthly unemployment numbers?
No, I don't think there's any issue with anything with the release other than the technology's changed and it's made it harder to control the security of the release.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to yield the 33 seconds I have.
I thank the gentleman. Dr. Hall, you keep talking about the security, the security, the security. Ultimately, if no wireless device is allowed in the room, and if wires do not accidentally or inadvertently bypass controls of a switch, then, and you don't let a reporter walk outside to set up his camera, if you don't do those things, you still have the same level of security you've always had, which are people 10 times a month or more, when convenient to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, when you want them there, not because otherwise you just release directly, but when you want them there, you put them in a room, and in fact, you don't give them access to send out information until you turn a switch. So I understand the technology. I spent a lot of time growing up in business in technology. But this doesn't sound like technology where it just oozes out. Ultimately, the failures that we heard about were mechanical failures, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Let me just say that BLS sees value in the lockup because we're not only tasked with disseminating, the BLS is not only tasked with disseminating the data, but they also want people to get it right. They want a chance to explain it so that it's reported correctly, and then when it's disseminated correctly. There aren't mistakes made and et cetera. So there's real value in the lockup. Just our concern is that it needs to be done in a secure environment. Now, the taking out of equipment out of the room, I can tell you what's really behind that. Is it's an effort to get traders out of the lockup, automatic traders. All right, so it was a decision, in my opinion, to get the traders out of there and have the lockup without traders in there. That decision is kind of a really critical policy-level decision for statistical agencies. I know of 2 agencies that have traders in the lockup. USDA has traders in their lockup they have commodity trading that come out of there. They, for years, have encouraged that. They're trying to facilitate traders working out of the lockup. It's on purpose. They have much higher levels of security, and they take care of things better. What this is an effort to some degree to sort of bail on allowing the trading and try to get it out.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
I'd be happy to yield time to the Chairman.
Then I'll pick up where I left off, which works out really well here. I started on a line, though, and I want to continue it. It is in the Bureau of Labor Statistics' interest to have lockups, and that's why they have them.
Absolutely.
When it is not in their interest, they simply put the information out.
Yes.
Okay. When I watch CNBC, Bloomberg, and other service, all the various, I came out of business, so I used to have multiple TVs in my office that distracted me from everything. But in fact, when I'd watch those, I would hear people trying to analyze your very statistics after the lockup had ended, after the numbers were out, and they were arguing often, Quintanilla and others, they were arguing back and forth about whether it really meant something, how it dealt with the previous revision, since you're somewhat famous for having a set of statistics and a revised set and a revised set. And all of that takes analysis that is far beyond the number, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And whether as Ms. Spear mentioned, there's a financial interest by people watching it, or simply a businessman trying to figure out whether my forecast for future products is going to go a different way, and I may want to reconsider how much I stock up on inventory for Christmas. Whatever the reason is, your facts, your statistics in a vacuum are dangerously useless if you don't have people who can make secondary evaluations and turn them into meaningful information with comment, dialogue, and perspective.
Absolutely. It's a very important part of BLS. It's also one of the reasons why BLS is tremendously available directly from the public. You can call us, et cetera. This is why I thought it's really important that nobody stands between BLS and the public in not only disseminating the data, but being able to describe it and help people understand it.
Well, I'm going to close with just one question for Mr. Moss and Mr. Doherty. If this rule, as it was originally requested, were to take effect, in which your people are put into a room with only essentially a typewriter of modern making, a PC with Word on it, and no reference data, no ability to bring in anything more than they happen to have in their head, wouldn't the quality of your reporting from your two major news services go down, and wouldn't the differentiation of your services be narrowed? Meaning, wouldn't you tend to look more alike if all you had was their source material and a half an hour to scratch up what you could on a typewriter?
Mr. Chairman, that would be very detrimental to the quality, accuracy, and context of what's now published at 8:30. For one reason, we would not be able to bring our software, which helps us with historical context. It helps us formulate tables, reams of data on everything from participation rate to gender to industries.
Mr. Doherty.
I would just add that not just that, but the quantity of information we're able to put out at 8:30 would drop dramatically, because we'd be doing a lot more by hand as opposed to things that are done by the software automation.
Thank you. In closing, I know there's been a lot of controversy here on how we count and what we count as green jobs, and we'll have more of that on the second panel. But I'd like to thank the representatives of the press, both broadly and specifically. It is unusual to have the press before this committee. It is not a standard for us to be asking you questions, and we really appreciate being able to get the answers. But it is so important that what you do, and the fact that as a businessman, I never subscribed to your services. I wasn't looking at it in that detail. I wasn't worried about making a trade immediately. But the things I read in the journal, in paper, and so on, in the days and weeks afterwards, I knew were affected by the quality of your initial reporting, not by the source data itself, but by the analysis of the source data. So on a personal basis, I want to thank you for pushing back to make sure that people in all aspects of life have the opportunity to have a free and differentiated press coming out of those lockups. And with that, I thank you. We're going to stand in recess for about 5 minutes while they reset for the second panel.